All right, guys, time for another kind of like a psychological social studies video, I guess. Just as much as one of the reasons besides my health why I quit the video game community, there's also a human element of the Street Fighter fighting game community that I can still appreciate as an adult. And I know I was just talking to APOC, Jason, or whatever, because I didn't want to like tell anyone's like story or allude to anyone's story too much if it's like a bad story with like putting their like feelings or history out there. So I asked if it was okay for something like that. But again, just as much as I quit video games because of health, I also quit because of the community. But there's also an interesting human aspect to Street Fighter and fighting games that I want to talk about. And this gets down to, again, kind of the stories I talk about when I say that being a nerd doesn't make you special. And this is a very hard thing to accept, maybe just as anyone, when you enjoy a hobby, this is a hard thing to accept that maybe you're not the best at it, especially when you think about a fighting game because it's a competitive endeavor. So, if you watch my channel, you know some of the stories I'll tell here. But again, when I was a kid, I didn't know that I was good at games, right? And I went to my very first tournament, and I beat basically everyone besides the dude that was considered the second best in the Midwest at the time, right? And then after that, very early on, the community started making up lies about me, and I've had a lot of health problems, and I saw, wow, a lot of the community is really fucked up, right? To the point that, of course, as the story goes on, I won my last tournament and I quit, and the community still makes up lies about me, right? Amazing, but when I got into games very early on, I also realized in the human aspect that a lot of the people I thought were going to be good at video games were not the people that were good at video games. Um, when you grow up and you're a nerd, maybe you often think that, oh, the person that's good at video games is going to be the nerdy Asian kid, maybe glasses, he's fat, he has pimples all over, right? He talks in math problems like maybe he doesn't talk like that, but he talks like really weird, right? And early on, I saw that those people generally were not very good at video games. Those people were often the most worst people at video games. A lot of times, you you meet someone like, oh man, they talk such a good game, and they were really not good at games, right? They couldn't do anything they talk about. Of course, as games have progressed, they've tried to actually appeal to those people to make games math problems and everything like that. They've tried to actually take away the human element from games. But so let's say some stories I've heard of like interesting people that I've met from video games. One of the very first interesting things was say like, man, I saw I'm a pretty white looking dude. I'm pretty white, surfer boy. Some people used to call me like the surfer boy or something like that. But I saw like a lot of more kind of like harder looking dudes, especially if you remember, God, if I was going to like to Detroit or something to play games, and you're like, man, there weren't a lot of fucking nerdy dudes in Detroit playing games. Let me tell you, right? You see like maybe a lot of more, again, from my perspective, maybe, right? See, like, maybe, like, man, all these like black dudes are actually like good at games, right? Like, man, it's like not really so much like the nerd. Like, man, it's like more dudes that were like, playing for a lot of these like black dudes, right? And you come to find out that, wow, a lot of people culturally maybe they don't want to get involved in drugs and violence and everything like that, so they go to the arcade as an escape in a sense, right? Of course, I've seen some bad things that fucking in Detroit, man. I remember some tournaments I've gone to, you saw like naked girls getting beat up in the street, probably by their pimp or something like that. Of course, not all arcades were like that, but we are allowed to carry guns where I live. So actually, I can even save myself. You know what I mean? I would not be trying to. Sometimes I see a lot of kids. They talk about like God, even about the combo videos I make. They say they're gonna like beat me up if they see me in real life or something like that. And it's like, dude, I don't know where you think people where I live, but people carry around guns. You know what I mean? I don't. I have a friend that he carries around a gun whenever we go to walk his dog. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why people try to act tough or something like that. Like, I would never, thankfully, anytime I've ever gotten almost into a fight. I've just been able to like put the dude in a headlock until they've like calmed down because I don't need to pretend that I'm tough because I'm not tough. I don't think any muscle I have is just for show. And I know lots of people carry guns. I don't need to worry about some nerd saying they're gonna throw a Hadoken or something like that. If someone has a gun, I think your gun beats you trying to do a karate move on me or a fight. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think that's interesting. So I think that's something you probably wouldn't think when you think about the nerd community. As a kid, you're like, oh man, all these nerdy Asian guys playing games, right? Well, a lot of those nerdy people are not very good at games, right? And again, this is hard for people to accept. What's some like other interesting things you see? How one of my friends that I'm still friends with today, man, he's like a scientist or something, a researcher. He's been published in multiple studies. I guess maybe from that sense, you might think that he's like a little bit more nerdy. And certainly, whenever I go to his house, he has like lots of video games all over like that. I think you would say he's nerdy, but maybe from an outside perspective, you would not assume that he is nerdy. Does that make sense, right? Maybe people look at me, they wouldn't assume Clayton is super nerdy, right? Um, Say APOC, and I've told these stories, like when I first went to tournaments, and I told Mike this, right? I'm not good friends with Mike Watson or anything like that, but I've talked to him a few times, and I've said before, it's almost kind of interesting. The last Evo I went to, just kind of randomly go to and like, oh, they're having this alpha tournament. And, I remember reading about guys like Mike Watson as a kid and everything like that, and thinking like, oh man, I wonder if I could ever play these guys. You know what I mean? And technically, that last Evo I went to, it was me and him in the finals of Alpha. Like, and I always say, man, I wish we could have played Street Fighter when I actually was playing well, or actually like I cared about games. Because I'm sure he didn't super care about the game. I didn't super care about the game. And when I first met these guys, oh man, and APOC has told me this story too. I thought I had to pay to play those guys. I was just so young. It's like, oh, these guys would never play a kid like me, and I was just so nervous, like playing these people. Like, I mean, that's something funny too. I think people don't realize when I was going to tournaments, like, dude, not only was I sick and fucked up, like, I definitely was not like a tournament player. Like, that's why I always say, like, I actually, I'm not saying I'm the most awesome player ever, but I never considered myself a tournament player. Um, I won a lot of tournaments fucked up and sick, and I never thought I was actually playing very well because I actually don't have that killer instinct, and you do need a killer instinct to play well, right? I mean, the community will just take the fun out of games for you so much. I mean, the fact that the community still makes up lies about me years later shows how many crazy people are in the community. But you need that killer instinct to be good. But the story I'm trying to say is like, man, I remember a kid, and I don't think people realize that people think games are big nowadays. Like when I was a kid, not only was Street Fighter a big game, Street Fighter was one of the most important, not just fighting games, video games of all time. Video games, not fighting games. Street Fighter was a cultural phenomenon. So getting a chance to like play guys, you know what I mean, that you would read about like Mike Watson and everything like that was just those were not important people in the fighting game community. Those were important people in video games, period. And as a kid, I always thought, man, I was like, whoa, I get to play these guys. Like, APOC is like, man, why were you giving me money to play me? I would have just played you. He's like, I didn't know. I was so, again, the very first tournament I went to, I ended up beating all these people besides the guy that was the second best in the Midwest. And I got second. It's like, man, I can win tournaments. I didn't even know. But I was still very nervous whenever I played, right? But an interesting story about APOC, right? APOC doesn't look like a guy that you would think is a video game player. I mean, APOC is, back then a very famous player. Maybe people don't know who he is now, right? But APOC is, man, I remember, and I've talked to APOC, and, as a kid, he told me one of the very first conversations I had with him, I think after I played when we were just talking about it, he was like, yeah, dude, I was actually kidnapped as a child. He was fucking kidnapped. Like, first of all, APOC doesn't look like a nerd. And then he told me the story. He was actually kidnapped as a child. And, then he went on to be a very, a famous player during that time in Street Fighter, right? A known player, right? And that's crazy, right? You wouldn't think that. APOC doesn't look like a nerd. And then you hear it like humanizes the situation, right? I remember a guy like Bill. I talked to Bill. Bill told me he got into games and he got into running because he was it almost like he like when I told him it's like he was running away from his problems, like he was doing all this running and everything like that, and he still runs to this day, to my knowledge. I think he's a teacher actually, and he runs marathons or something like that. He doesn't look like a super nerdy dude, but you hear that aspect like, oh, he was like running because like running away from all his problems, and then he could play Street Fighter. That's like again, that's like a human aspect of Street Fighter. And I'm not saying the human aspect doesn't exist anymore in video games because obviously we're all human, we're all playing. But I think a lot of people, whereas I actually appreciate it, I think it's actually really interesting. A lot of people hear it and I think it makes them mad because it's a fighting game, because it's a competitive endeavor. Whenever you hear maybe someone else is also a human being, I think there's that very negative side of the video game community that can come out in some people. And it's like, oh, fuck, I want to be the best. And again, look at people like me. The fact that the community has said that I lied about being sick is just so ridiculous, ridiculous, disgust. That's not an English word. Ridiculous, disgusting, right? I guess they see me and they're like, I mean, people don't realize. Do you think that how the fuck? I mean, do people think I'm some famous model? I'm not some famous model or something. When I actually had an opportunity to really do stuff with modeling, I didn't take it seriously, and then I got sick, dude, like really sick, like hair falling out. No one's gonna fucking hire me when I'm like that. You know what I mean? Now I'm older. Like, what are you gonna do? And I'm still sick. I'm still sick, dude. It's not like I'm gonna go to a tournament now, even if I did really care about games and I didn't hate the community for all they did to me. You know what I mean? Be so bitter against them, like, oh, now I'm not sick. Like, dude, you realize that I've sacrificed a lot of my life to be the most healthy version of Clayton Chapman I could be, to be the best Clayton Chapman I can be. It isn't magically like I just suddenly haven't had that surgery on my hands. I haven't, had all these terrible health problems, right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm still sick. Like, people are really like, I used to go to tournaments with garbage bags in my pocket in case I got sick if I couldn't reach the bathroom before I could get there, right? So I'm still sick, right? I mean, my health is not some super better thing, you know what I mean? And I think maybe because of how I look too, some people they didn't appreciate that human element, which I guess some people could have taken that story for. They actually wanted to hate me for it, which is even stranger because throughout all the years, all the people that I said were shady and actually doing shit, when I actually tried to protect the, I mean, people don't realize a lot of reason I wasn't friend with other top players is because, and I'm not saying everyone's bad because obviously I've told some good stories here too. And there's other good stories, but there's lots of bad stories, obviously, if you've ever watched my vlogs. Um, a lot of top players too, or these other people. Hell, there's a lot of nerd on nerd hate crime. A lot of these fucking nerds doesn't have to be a top player, it could be any nerd. A lot of people are always making fun of everyone, talking shit, and I didn't want to be part of that, dude. I don't care about that shit, dude. I didn't play video games to hate on other people. And maybe you could say, oh, well, you can easily say that because you were actually able to win tournaments while you were sick. You were able to find all this stuff, all these. So it's like easy for you to say, okay, I can understand that perspective, maybe. But the thing is, I never benefited from ever taking advantage of the community. I never took advantage of the community. The community took advantage of me helping it. I've actually helped the community before, and the community made up lies about me, which is so crazy. Again, I say after all these years, after people have actually been caught scamming people when they were trying to say that I was the one lying. And years later, people still try to say, oh, Clayton, he's this asshole. He thinks he's this god, whatever. It's like, dude, I never benefited from anything that the community said that I did, even after now proof that it was all these people that I was saying was actually doing it. I never benefited from it. Look at the community. Look at Dragon Ball Fighter Z, I say, right? It's funny. I tried to help the community. Look whose channels profited off it. I'm not raking in the YouTube money. These dudes that said that I was going to be wrong when I was correct, their YouTubes got bigger. All these dudes that constantly made up, they're the ones that profited. So why people think that Clayton Chapman has fucking profited off of whatever I've said is ridiculous because I sure fucking haven't. And if anything, all this nerd on nerd hate crime, dude, like Dude, I tried to protect people, but I guess people couldn't appreciate that human aspect of me, right? Because they wanted to say it was a lie. Which again, how did I benefit? There's never been any evidence that I benefited from anything I've said. If anything, I tried to help people, and people said I lied. But that's why I said I actually don't feel too bad when I hear some of these people have gotten scammed on themselves. It's like, maybe you should have believed me. And like I said, hell, maybe there's some kind of coping mechanism within them that still think, even though we saw proof that Clayton was right, I'm still going to say I hate Clayton because I lived with that lie for so long, right? I'm sure there's people like that, obviously. But anyway, I was trying to, so besides that, the human aspect I think is actually pretty interesting. And I think that's something that a lot of people can't accept. And that's, again, getting on to people need to realize that being a nerd doesn't make you good at a video game, unfortunately. And I think that's hard for people to accept. And I know they're trying their best to get rid of it, but it hasn't made games more popular. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's again, I give Guilty Gear as a good example because Guilty Gear was a game that was seen as a very nerdy game. When we're all nerds in a way, right? Maybe some more nerdy than others, right? Maybe your only nerdy thing is like, again, I wouldn't say that APOC is some super huge nerd. He wouldn't come out. But if we think from the perspective like, oh, we're all playing video games, we're all nerdy in this way. We all have a hobby we enjoy. And so what I'm trying to get, being the nerd doesn't make you special because it just doesn't. You're not a special snowflake for enjoying a hobby, right? That doesn't necessarily make you better than someone else. But Guilty Gear was a good example because I think it was seen as a kind of a nerdy game. But it's like, oh, these nerds, they thought we weren't good at Street Fighter. But now we have a game like Guilty Gear. And then the nerds saw that, oh, fuck, even though I thought I had my special thing, I'm still not special. And that was very hard for people to accept. And of course, they've been trying their best to, like, oh, God, how can we make a game a math problem? How can we pre-contrive this game to appeal to this nerd to keep playing our game? But the nerd was always going to play if they actually enjoy the game. You know, this nerd, these, how many times have I said, how many times do you see? I'm sure I have people on my Facebook and I just roll my eyes like, God, I'm never entering a tournament again. Fuck this game, dude. I'm never entering this tournament. I hate this goddamn game. Fuck this game. It's so fucking cheap. Motherfuckers still enter tournaments all the time. I still see them posting about video games all day long, dude. They still keep entering tournaments. I remember this one dude. We don't need to say his name. How many fucking years have I seen this guy say he's never gonna enter a tournament again? He still keeps entering. I got you, dude. That's why I was thinking people think that like, oh, why do you play games, Clay, if you hate them or if you hate the community? I did. I did quit games. I don't actually associate with the community. I don't go to tournaments anymore. I actually did what I said I was going to do. I just enjoy games in my own way. I'm not going posting on Facebook. I'm not posting on other forums like, man, I hate this game. Gosh darn tootin'. I hate this game, but I'm gonna keep playing it, right? But a lot of people actually do that, dude. That's why I said, like, personally for me, if I don't like something, I'm not gonna play it, right? But a lot of these people, a lot of these nerds that say they hate something, they still play. You know what I mean? So I mean, like the nerd being a nerd doesn't make you special, right? And trying to appeal to this nerd doesn't matter because they're still gonna play, dude. That type of nerd, it doesn't matter, dude. So trying to make games easier hasn't made more people play. You know what I mean? Because generally, if you like something, right? You know what I mean? Hopefully, you get what I'm getting. So I was trying to get kind of the human aspect of Street Fighter that I still appreciate, and I think it's interesting. Not everyone appreciates that because people want to hate on each other. It's a negative world, I guess, you know. But you meet a lot of people. I think it is interesting. As many people that again, I've met enough negative people to the point that I quit video games. But you do meet certain people, and if you can appreciate the human perspective of games, it makes it interesting, right? Do you get what I'm getting at? Being a nerd doesn't make you special, and there is a human aspect of Street Fighter and video games that is kind of still psychologically interesting to me, even after all these years. The end.